There are moments in life when silence seems louder than any word, when everything around us continues its normal course. But inside us, there is an unsettling feeling that something is being formed far from prying eyes, without applause, without recognition, and without clear explanations. It is in this invisible territory that David's story truly begins. Not on the battlefield, not in the palace, nor before crowds, but in absolute anonymity, in a place where no one expected something grand to be born. Before being king, before being a hero, before being a poet or warrior, David was just a forgotten young man in the countryside, tending sheep, far from the centers of decision-making, far from human expectations, but precisely where God usually works most deeply. While his brothers were seen as strong, prepared, and worthy of attention, David occupied the space that no one disputed, that place that seems too small to contain great promises. Psychologically, this scenario is familiar to many of us, because there are phases in life where we do everything right, we are faithful in little things, we remain constant, but we are still ignored. Not because we have failed, but because the time has not yet come for us to be seen. The field where David shepherded was not just a physical space. It was an environment of inner formation, where character was molded without witnesses, where faithfulness did not receive immediate rewards, and where the relationship with God deepened far from any external validation. It is at this point that the biblical narrative begins to challenge our logic, because when God decides to choose a new king for Israel, he does not go to the palace, does not consult strategists, does not analyze resumes, nor is he impressed by appearance, stature, or reputation. God sends Samuel to Jesse's house, and there, one by one, the eldest sons pass before the prophet, each carrying the expectation that their turn has finally come. But repeatedly, God says no. Not because those men were evil, but because the divine criterion does not operate by the same yardstick as the human eye. There is something profoundly disconcerting at this moment. All the possible candidates seem to be present, but the chosen one is not even in the room. When Samuel asks if there are any sons left, Jesse's answer reveals more than it seems. There is still the youngest, but he is in the field tending the sheep. This phrase carries enormous symbolic weight because it shows that, in the eyes of his own family, David wasn't even considered a possibility. He wasn't forgotten by chance. He was left out due to expectation, preconceived judgment, or a misinterpretation of what God might want. How often does this happen to us, when even the closest people fail to see what God is silently forming? When David is finally called, there is no prior preparation, no time to adjust his appearance or rehearse words. He arrives from the field exactly as he is, carrying the scent of invisible work, simple routine, and unrecognized faithfulness. And it is at this moment that God shatters all human expectations by declaring that this seemingly unlikely young man is the chosen one. The anointing takes place before his brothers, but without detailed explanations, without a public coronation, without an immediate change of scenery. The Spirit of God comes upon David, but his outward life remains exactly the same. He returns to the field. He returns to silence. He returns to anonymity. This is one of the hardest lessons to accept on the spiritual journey. The fact that being chosen by God doesn't mean being immediately promoted, seen, or recognized. Often, the anointing precedes long periods of waiting, and the promise arrives long before its fulfillment. Internally, something changes, but externally, everything seems the same. And it is precisely there that many give up, because they confuse silence with abandonment and waiting with forgetfulness. David's story shows us that God is in no hurry to reveal what he is still forming, because premature exposure can destroy what character cannot yet sustain. In the field, far from human eyes, David learns to deal with fear, loneliness, responsibility, and trust. It is there that he faces lions and bears, not to impress anyone, but to protect what has been entrusted to him. He learns that loyalty doesn't depend on an audience, that courage isn't born on stage, and that true spiritual strength develops when no one is watching. Each seemingly ordinary day contributes to a profound, silent, and irreversible formation that will later sustain David when pressure, injustice, and persecution become constant. This first part of the story doesn't speak of visible victories, but of invisible foundations. It confronts us with an honest and uncomfortable question: what are we becoming while we wait? Because the time of anonymity is not a useless interval, but fertile ground where God works with precision, shaping not only skills, but the heart. David didn't become a man after God's own heart by chance, but because he learned, in the silence of the field, to remain faithful even when no one seemed to care. And perhaps it is precisely here that this story begins to touch our own lives, because many are living through phases in which they seem too small for the promise they carry, too invisible to the dreams they feel in their hearts. David's journey reminds us that God does not ignore these periods. On the contrary, he uses them as a foundation for everything that is yet to come. The field was not a setback on David's path. It was the true beginning of his formation. If this reflection resonated with you, if this quiet beginning resembles the phase you are going through now, perhaps this story still has much to reveal to your heart. Stay with us on this journey, because what God begins in silence, he sustains until the end. After the anointing, something profoundly changes within David, even though nothing seems to change around him. He receives no instructions, is not removed from the field, gains no position, and receives no explanations. The promise enters his life silently, and paradoxically, the silence becomes even more intense. Psychologically, this is one of the most challenging moments in the spiritual journey, because now David knows he has been chosen, but he needs to continue living as if nothing had happened. He carries an inner certainty that finds no external confirmation, and this tension between what God has revealed and what reality shows begins to profoundly shape his soul. When a promise arrives ahead of schedule, it creates a specific kind of pain. It's not the pain of loss, but the pain of conscious waiting. David knows that God has chosen him, but he doesn't know when, how, or in what way that choice will manifest itself. He needs to learn to live with a truth that cannot yet be fully experienced. Many fail precisely here, because the promise, instead of generating hope, generates anxiety, comparison, and haste. But David doesn't rush to prove himself. He doesn't try to force circumstances. He doesn't use the anointing as an argument to demand recognition. He returns to the field not because the promise has lost its value, but because he understands, even if intuitively, that God's timing cannot be accelerated without cost. During this period, David begins to develop something essential: the ability to sustain an identity that doesn't depend on function, title, or external validation. He has already been anointed king, but he remains a shepherd. This teaches him that who he is before God needs to be stronger than what he has not yet become before men. This maturity doesn't arise from speeches, but from daily repetition, constant faithfulness, and small choices made away from the spotlight. Each day in the field becomes a silent exercise in trust, a training to prevent the promise from turning into pride or frustration. It is in this context that music begins to play a fundamental role in David's life. In the silence of the countryside, he sings, composes, prays, and transforms his solitude into a dialogue with God. Many of the psalms that would later touch generations are born from this invisible space where there is no audience, only sincerity. Music is not entertainment for David, it is emotional and spiritual survival. It becomes a way to organize his heart, to deal with fear, to express joy, anguish, confidence, and hope. While the world does not see him, God hears him. What David doesn't know is that this same talent, developed in anonymity, will be the instrument God uses to connect him to the next chapter of his story. When Saul's spirit begins to waver and the court seeks someone who can bring relief, David's name emerges not through human strategy, but through divine providence. The field prepared him for the palace without him needing to leave the field before his time. This is one of the most beautiful marks of God's guidance. He connects the invisible to the visible at the right moment, without wasting any previous phase. Upon arriving at Saul's court, David enters an environment completely different from what he knew. The palace is filled with tension, power, insecurity, and fear. Saul, although still king, no longer lives in peace with himself. David's presence brings temporary relief, but also initiates a complex relationship, because now the anointed young man observes firsthand the weight of leadership without sustained character. Psychologically, this contact is formative, as David learns not only how to lead, but also how not to lead. He sees what happens when fear governs decisions, when insecurity replaces trust in God, and these silent observations become profound lessons for the future. Even in the palace, David remains humble. He doesn't use his anointing as a shield. He doesn't impose himself. He doesn't claim space. He serves. He serves with music, with his presence, with loyalty. This behavior reveals something essential. David understands that the promise doesn't place him above people, but calls him to serve more deeply. He learns that true authority doesn't come from position, but from the willingness to care for, relieve, and support others, even when it doesn't bring immediate benefit. This phase of David's life confronts us with a difficult truth to accept. Often, God gives us a promise not to hasten us, but to deepen our understanding. Waiting is not a punishment. It is a tool. The time between anointing and fulfillment is not empty. It is full of formation, correction, maturation, and silent learning. David doesn't waste time waiting. He becomes someone capable of sustaining what is yet to come. Perhaps you are experiencing exactly that interval, that space between what God has placed in your heart and what reality has not yet revealed. A time when you know there is something greater, but you continue to live simple, repetitive, and little appreciated tasks. David's story reminds us that this interval is not wasted. It is preparation. Nothing that is lived faithfully is lost. If this part of the journey resonated with you, if this conscious waiting reflects something you are facing now, continue walking with us. David's story is only beginning, and what comes next will show how the promise, when tested by reality, reveals who is truly ready to carry it. There comes a moment in life when everything formed in silence is called to manifest itself in public, not for self-promotion, but for confrontation. For David, this moment arrives when he temporarily leaves the field and goes to meet his brothers in the Israelite camp. What he finds there is not just an armed army, but a people paralyzed by fear. For days, a giant named Goliath challenges Israel, not only with physical strength, but with words that corrode their collective identity, faith, and courage. The giant does not win merely through stature, but through the daily repetition of humiliation, because prolonged fear has the power to weaken even those who were once brave. David arrives at this scene without the mindset of a professional soldier, but with a heart molded in the field. He hears Goliath's taunts and perceives something that others can no longer see. That challenge is not just against men, it is against God himself. Psychologically, this reveals a crucial difference between David and the experienced soldiers. While they analyze the size of the problem, David assesses who is being challenged. The perspective changes everything. Fear grows when the problem occupies the center of vision, but faith grows when God occupies that place. When David begins to question why no one reacts, he is not met with encouragement, but with contempt. His own older brother accuses him of arrogance, implying that he is there only out of curiosity. This moment is profoundly revealing because it shows that often the first obstacle we face when trying to act in faith does not come from the external enemy, but from familiar voices that discredit our motivations. David could have retreated, wounded in his pride, but he does not allow himself to be defined by the opinions of others. He has already learned in silence that his identity does not depend on the approval of others. When brought before Saul, David presents himself without emotional armor or rehearsed speeches. He doesn't exaggerate his abilities, but neither does he diminish his confidence. He speaks from experience. He remembers the lions and the bears, the lonely nights when he had to act alone, trusting that God would be with him. This detail is fundamental because it shows that David's courage doesn't stem from a momentary impulse, but from a spiritual memory built up over time. He knows who God was in the past, and this sustains his confidence in the present. Saul tries to clothe David in his own armor, offering human protection for a spiritual battle, but David quickly realizes that it doesn't work. The armor is heavy, uncomfortable, and strange. He decides to face it in the way he knows, with what he has faithfully developed in anonymity. This choice reveals a rare maturity. David doesn't try to become someone else to defeat the giant. He remains true to who he became in the process. Many defeats occur when we try to fight spiritual battles using tools that don't correspond to our inner formation. When David walks toward Goliath, the contrast is almost absurd. A young shepherd with a sling and some stones facing an experienced warrior armed from head to toe. Goliath mocks him, reduces David to his appearance, tries to humiliate him publicly. But David doesn't respond in kind. His words are not empty provocation, they are a declaration of faith. He makes it clear that this fight is not about physical strength, but about who governs history. He knows he is not alone, and this conviction completely changes the balance of the battle. The moment of confrontation is swift, almost silent in its execution, but profoundly symbolic. A single stone, thrown with precision, brings down the giant. What seemed impossible happens without exaggerated spectacle. This detail is important. God doesn't need complexity to act, only availability. David's victory doesn't exalt man, but reveals God's faithfulness to those who trust in him. The giant falls, not because David was superior, but because faith confronted fear without retreating. This episode marks a turning point. David becomes known, celebrated, and praised. But internally, something even deeper happens. He learns that true courage doesn't eliminate fear, but rather decides to move forward despite it. He discovers that what was built in anonymity is enough to face public challenges, and that God honors those who remain faithful to what they became in silence. The story of Goliath is not just about defeating great external enemies, but about confronting what intimidates us from within. Each person carries their own giants, old fears, persistent insecurities, voices that say, "We are not capable." David shows us that these giants are not defeated by comparison or brute force, but by a confidence built over time in small acts of loyalty that no one applauded. Perhaps you are facing a challenge that seems greater than your strength, something that intimidates you daily and tries to steal your courage. David's story reminds us that the same God who sustains us in anonymity also acts in confrontation. If this reflection resonated with you, stay with us. There is still much to learn about what happens after victory, because the greatest challenge doesn't always come before triumph. Often, it begins right after it. The victory over Goliath changes the external landscape of David's life, but it inaugurates an internal and relational conflict far more complex than the confrontation with a visible giant. What was once silence now transforms into exposure, and the same victory that liberates one people begins, little by little, to imprison the heart of another. David returns from the battlefield as a hero, celebrated in songs, recognized by the people, and publicly honored. But while the voices of the multitudes rise in gratitude, something dark begins to stir within Saul. The joy of liberation gives way to comparison, and comparison opens the door to envy, which silently corrodes everything it touches. This is one of the most delicate points in David's journey, because he did nothing to provoke this conflict. He didn't seek fame, he didn't manipulate narratives, he didn't exalt himself before the king. Yet, he comes to be seen as a threat. Psychologically, this experience is profoundly destabilizing, as it confronts us with the reality that not all opposition arises from error. Some is born precisely when we do what is right. Envy doesn't need a concrete reason. It feeds on the perception of loss, real or imagined. Saul begins to look at David not as someone whom God used, but as someone who can take what he fears losing. The song echoing through the streets, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s," becomes a powerful emotional trigger. Not because it objectively diminishes Saul, but because it exposes his deepest insecurity. From that moment on, the king's gaze changes. Where there was approval before, now there is vigilance. Where there was relief, now there is distrust. David realizes that something has broken, but he doesn't fully understand why. He learns in practice that human favor is unstable, and that the same hand that applauds today may close in threat tomorrow. Even so, David does not react with rebellion or direct confrontation. He continues serving, playing, leading with excellence, maintaining the posture of loyalty that has always characterized him. This choice is significant because it reveals a maturity that goes beyond the emotion of the moment. He does not allow injustice to alter his identity. He does not try to defend himself by attacking. He does not use his popularity as a shield. He does not rely on the support of the people to impose himself. He remains upright, even when the atmosphere around him becomes hostile. Saul, on the other hand, sinks deeper and deeper into his own instability. Envy gives way to fear, and fear transforms into violence. The king begins to try to eliminate what he cannot control. In moments of fury, he hurls his spear at David, attempting to kill him. The contrast is shocking. The one who was used to bring relief now becomes the target of aggression. For David, this creates a deep emotional wound, because the threat does not come from a declared enemy, but from someone he respects and serves. Betrayals of this nature leave silent scars as they confuse the mind and the heart. However, something extraordinary happens during this period. Even under threat, David continues to prosper. Not because the circumstances are favorable, but because God is with him. Every mission he receives is accomplished with wisdom. Every battle is won with discernment, and this only intensifies Saul's inner conflict. The more David acts correctly, the more threatened Saul feels. This dynamic reveals a harsh yet real truth. There are people who cannot bear to see faithfulness prosper because it exposes what they themselves have abandoned. In this tense atmosphere, one of the most beautiful relationships in the biblical narrative is also born, the friendship between David and Jonathan. Unlike Saul, Jonathan does not see David as a threat, but as someone worthy of love and loyalty. He recognizes God's hand upon his friend's life, and in a profoundly symbolic gesture gives up his garments and weapons, signaling not only friendship but submission to the divine purpose. Jonathan teaches that true friendship does not compete with the other's calling, but rejoices with it, even when this requires giving up legitimate rights. This contrast between Saul and Jonathan further deepens David's learning. He experiences at the same time the pain of unjust persecution and the comfort of loyal friendship. He learns that God, even in hostile environments, always preserves people who serve as emotional and spiritual anchors. These relationships do not eliminate pain, but they make it possible to go through it without losing hope. David begins to understand that the path of promise is not linear, and that faithfulness to God does not guarantee the absence of conflict, but it does guarantee presence in the midst of it. Here we are confronted with an uncomfortable reality. Not every victory brings immediate peace. Some open doors to more subtle and lasting trials. The envy of others, unexplained injustice, and the loss of emotional security are profound tests of character. David shows us that the correct response is not to harden our hearts or become cynical, but to remain faithful even when the environment becomes toxic. Perhaps you are experiencing something similar, being questioned, watched, or even attacked, not for failings, but for doing what is right. David's story reminds us that God sees these situations and continues to work, even when injustice seems to prevail. If this reflection resonated with you, stay with us on this journey. What follows will show how faithfulness is tested when the threat ceases to be occasional and begins to define an entire season of life. There is a point in David's story where the tension ceases to be episodic and begins to define his entire reality. The threat is no longer an isolated outburst of Saul's fury, but a clear decision. David must die. From that moment on, everything changes. The celebrated hero becomes a target, the faithful servant becomes hunted, and the one who defeated a giant in open field now needs to learn to survive in the shadows. Psychologically, this transition is devastating because it's not just about losing security, but about losing immediate meaning. David did everything right, was loyal, served with excellence, respected authority, and yet he finds himself forced to flee to preserve his own life. The escape doesn't stem from cowardice, but from lucidity. To remain would not be faith, but recklessness. David learns a difficult lesson here. Trusting in God doesn't mean ignoring reality, but discerning when it's time to resist and when it's time to retreat. The hasty departure from the palace is not triumphant, it's silent and painful. He leaves behind stability, position, routine, and even the daily companionship with those he loves. The escape carries with it an invisible grief, the grief for what could have been if injustice hadn't taken hold. During this period, David experiences something profoundly human, the feeling of no longer belonging anywhere. He cannot return to the field as before. He cannot remain in the palace. He does not yet have a kingdom. He becomes a man in transit, living between promises and threats, between God's calling and the persecution of men. This condition of constant instability produces profound emotional wear and tear, forcing the heart to live in a state of permanent alert. Every sound could be danger, every unfamiliar face could hide betrayal. Even so, something remarkable happens. David does not become bitter. He feels fear, anguish, confusion, but he does not allow these feelings to distance him from God. Many of the most intense psalms are born precisely during this period, expressing a heart that does not deny the pain, but refuses to lose faith. He learns to pray in a raw, honest way, without religious embellishments. His spirituality matures because it is no longer sustained by public victories, but by daily dependence, By taking refuge in caves and remote regions, David begins to attract people like himself, men in debt, bitter, wounded, dissatisfied with life. They are not heroes, they are not strong, they are not examples of success. They are broken people. And ironically, it is with this unlikely group that David begins to exercise true leadership. He does not govern from a throne, but from empathy. He leads because he understands pain, because he knows rejection, because he lives with insecurity. This time forges in him a type of authority that cannot be learned in palaces, the authority of someone who has been at rock bottom and has not lost his humanity. Saul's persecution intensifies, and David has clear opportunities to react violently, to shorten the path, to take what has already been promised to him. But he doesn't. He refuses to kill Saul, even when it would mean the immediate end of his suffering. This decision is not weakness, it is moral strength. David understands that there are limits that cannot be crossed without spiritual cost. He refuses to build his future on unjust blood, even when that blood belongs to someone who persecutes him. This choice reveals something central to David's identity. He prefers to continue suffering rather than lose his integrity. He trusts that the same God who promised is also capable of fulfilling his promise in due time without him needing to violate principles to accelerate the process. This trust does not eliminate the pain of persecution, but it preserves something even more valuable, an aligned heart. David learns that winning too soon in the wrong way can cost more than waiting while suffering. There are times when faithfulness leads not to comfort, but to exile. Doing what is right doesn't always protect us from injustice, but it protects us from becoming what hurts us. David shows us that fleeing is not giving up, and waiting is not wasting time. There are times when simply surviving is a profound form of faith. Perhaps you are going through such a period in which life seems like a succession of losses, displacements, and uncertainties, even without having done anything wrong. David's story reminds us that God does not abandon us in exile, and that it is often precisely there, far from safety and approval, that he forms leaders with broken hearts and unwavering faith. If this part of the journey resonated with you, if this feeling of being on the run, emotionally, spiritually, or existentially, seems familiar, keep walking with us. And if this content has spoken to your heart, consider subscribing to the Bible Teachers channel and sharing this reflection with someone who is also going through a difficult time. David's story still holds profound lessons about waiting, enduring, and remaining faithful when everything seems unstable. As time passes, the escape ceases to be merely an emergency reaction and transforms into a prolonged condition. David is no longer just escaping immediate danger. He is learning to live under constant threat. Saul's persecution becomes obsessive, methodical, almost personal. The king mobilizes resources, men, and strategies not to protect the kingdom, but to eliminate the one who, paradoxically, contributed most to its stability. For David, this deepens a silent wound, the feeling that injustice has no end in sight. Psychologically, this type of prolonged suffering is one of the most difficult to endure because it wears down not only the body, but also hope. It is in this context that the most dangerous opportunities in David's life arise, not dangerous because they threaten his safety, but because they threaten his integrity. On more than one occasion, Saul is completely vulnerable before him. The situation is clear, almost absurd. The persecutor is defenseless, and the persecuted has the chance to end it all. To any outside observer, the conclusion seems obvious. Many of the men who accompany David interpret that moment as a direct answer from God, as if the opportunity were synonymous with permission. "This is the day the Lord promised you," they say. The logic is simple. If God placed Saul there, then killing Saul would only be cooperating with the divine plan. But it is precisely here that David's spiritual maturity is most clearly revealed. He perceives something his companions fail to see. Not every opportunity is a permission, and not everything that seems to quickly solve a problem comes from God. There is a profound difference between trusting in divine providence and using God as justification for impulsive decisions. David feels the weight of temptation not only as a practical possibility, but as an internal conflict. He knows that with a single gesture, he could end years of suffering, yet something within him resists. As David silently approached Saul in the cave, he cut only a piece of his garment. Even this minimal gesture weighed on his conscience. He felt he had crossed an inner boundary, even though he had not physically harmed the king. This reveals a heart extremely sensitive to the presence of God, a heart that is not guided merely by what is permitted, but by what is consistent with the divine character. David understood that he could not build a just future from an unjust act, even if that act seemed functional and even logical. David's refusal to kill Saul stems not from fear, but from reverence. He recognizes that Saul, despite his failings, still occupies a position established by God. To seize the throne by force would mean taking control of something God promised to deliver in due time. This decision is emotionally costly because it means choosing to continue suffering when there was an immediate way out. It means trusting that God is capable of acting without needing human shortcuts. This trust is not passive, it is active, conscious, and profoundly difficult. In another similar instance, David enters Saul's camp at night. Again, the king is vulnerable, fast asleep. Once more, his men urge him to act, and once again, David refuses. He takes only the spear and the water jug as proof that he could have ended it all, but chose not to. This gesture communicates something powerful. David doesn't need to kill to prove he could kill. He doesn't need to destroy to assert his strength. His authority doesn't come from violence, but from self-control. These choices shaped David in a way that no military victory could. He learned to govern himself before governing a nation. He learned that the true test of character lies not in confronting declared enemies, but in dealing with morally justifiable temptations. Killing Saul might seem righteous in human eyes, but it would violate something essential within him. David chose to preserve his heart, even if it prolonged the pain. What do we do when we have the power to take shortcuts? When we have justifications, external support, and even spiritual arguments to make decisions that alleviate pain but compromise integrity? David teaches us that the price of keeping a pure heart may be high, but the cost of losing it is always greater. Perhaps you are facing a similar choice, not literal but symbolic. A decision that may alleviate your waiting, your frustration, or your pain, but which requires giving up principles that you know are important. David's story reminds us that God is not impressed by speed, but by faithfulness. He honors those who prefer to wait with integrity rather than win with guilt. If this reflection speaks to you, if you've ever felt the temptation to solve everything at once, stay with us on this journey. And if you wish to continue following profound reflections like this, subscribe to the Bible Teachers channel. David's journey also reveals how God works not only to lead us to our destination, but to make us capable of sustaining what he promises. There is a type of weariness that doesn't stem from immediate fear, but from the duration of waiting. After so many escapes, difficult choices, and conscious refusals of shortcuts, David begins to feel the accumulated weight of living in suspense. He continues to trust in God, but now faith must coexist with emotional exhaustion, the kind that doesn't arise from an isolated event, but from the continuous repetition of uncertainty. Psychologically, this is one of the most delicate moments in the human journey, because it's no longer about deciding between right and wrong, but about continuing to do what is right when the soul is exhausted from waiting for results. David spends years living as a stranger in his own land, constantly changing places, always attentive, always alert. The danger is no longer just Saul, but the silent erosion of hope. When the promise takes too long, the mind begins to negotiate small concessions. It's not about abandoning faith, but about adapting it to make it more bearable. It is at this point that many do not realize they are slowly drifting away from the center of their purpose. The heart does not rebel all at once. It tires little by little. In a moment of emotional fragility, David makes a decision that reveals this exhaustion. He seeks refuge among the Philistines, ancient enemies of Israel. It is not a choice driven by spiritual conviction, but by burnout. He thinks to himself that if he remains there, Saul will give up pursuing him. The logic seems reasonable, almost strategic. David does not consciously abandon God, but tries to find rest outside the territory of the promise. This detail is important because it shows that even deeply faithful people can make misguided decisions when they are too tired to continue waiting. Living among the Philistines places David in a morally ambiguous position. He needs to act with constant caution, maintain appearances, and engage in strategic lies to preserve his life and the lives of his men. Although God continues to protect David, this period reveals how decisions made out of exhaustion can lead us to uncomfortable internal situations. The soul no longer finds rest, only temporary relief. The promise still exists, but it seems distant, almost abstract. This passage from David's story is profoundly human because it dismantles the romanticized idea of unwavering faith at all times. It shows us that prolonged waiting can lead us to choices we wouldn't make in moments of strength. Yet even during this period, God does not abandon David. This doesn't mean unrestricted approval, but divine faithfulness. God continues to work, even when the servant acts from weakness. Grace doesn't cancel the consequences, but it prevents the error from becoming permanent. The breaking point occurs when David realizes that remaining in that place will put him in direct conflict with his own people. He finds himself about to fight alongside the Philistines against Israel. This is the limit that reveals how far he has strayed from the center. Psychologically, this shock acts as a painful awakening. Sometimes God allows us to get too close to the consequences so that we can clearly see the path we are taking. David doesn't actually fight against Israel, but the mere fact of being close to it reveals the silent danger of untreated weariness. After being removed from the battle, David returns to find Ziklag destroyed, his wives and children taken captive. This moment is devastating. Everything he tried to protect through weary choices seems to have been lost. His own men, overcome with grief, speak of stoning him. Here, David reaches one of his lowest emotional points. Rejected by Saul, rejected by his enemies, and now questioned by those who walked with him, the leader finds himself completely alone. It is at this moment that something essential happens. David strengthens himself in the Lord. This simple phrase carries enormous depth. It is not an impulsive gesture, but a conscious return to the source. David does not blame God, he does not harden his heart, he does not give in to despair. He returns to consulting the Lord, something he had stopped doing with the same frequency. This return marks an internal turning point. Before recovering anything externally, David recovers the center of his heart. Restoration begins from the inside out. God guides David, and he recovers everything that had been lost. No life is lost. This episode seals a profound truth. Even when our choices are influenced by weariness, God is able to restore when there is humility to return. David learns that true rest does not come from fleeing to easier places, but from renewing trust in the one who made the promise. The danger lies not only in great sins, but in small decisions made out of exhaustion. Waiting is tiring. Trusting for too long is tiring. Suffering unjustly is tiring. But abandoning the spiritual center, even discreetly, always exacts a price. David teaches us that the path back begins when we recognize our weariness and choose once again to strengthen ourselves in God. Time passes, and the story begins to move almost imperceptibly, as if the pieces were being adjusted outside David's field of vision. The persecution that once dominated his days ends not through any action of his, but through an outcome he never tried to hasten. Saul dies in battle, and with him closes an entire cycle of flight, tension, and waiting. The news doesn't arrive as immediate liberation, but as a heavy silence. David doesn't celebrate. He doesn't rush to take what was always promised to him. His first reaction is not triumph but lament. He weeps for Saul and Jonathan, honoring those who persecuted him and those who loved him. This gesture reveals something profoundly counterintuitive. Even after years of injustice, David's heart was not deformed by resentment. The absence of vengeance is as significant as any previous victory. David could have used Saul's death as justification for self-aggrandizement, but he chooses something more difficult, maintaining his integrity even when no one else could question him. This mourning is not theatrical, it is sincere. He acknowledges the weight of the loss for the nation and for himself. Jonathan, a loyal friend, is gone. Saul, the anointed king, has fallen. The path to the throne is now open, but David's heart is still processing. When David finally moves, he doesn't do so impulsively. He consults God before each step. Instead of immediately assuming the entire throne, he accepts to govern only a part of the people. He is anointed king in Hebron, not over all of Israel, but over Judah. This step seems small for someone carrying such a great promise, but David doesn't despise the process. He governs faithfully where he is, without rushing to dominate what has not yet been given to him. Power arrives in parts, as everything in his life did, gradually demanding constant maturity. While David grows in strength and stability, the kingdom remains divided. There is tension, internal conflict, political games, and unjust deaths. Even so, David takes a clear stance. He does not celebrate violence, does not reward betrayal, and does not build his reign on undeserved bloodshed. When men kill in his name hoping for recognition, he reacts firmly, showing that his rule will not be sustained by the logic of fear, but by principles. The power now within his reach does not alter his sense of justice. On the contrary, it deepens it. The division period is long. Years pass before all the tribes of Israel recognize David as king. When this finally happens, it is not the result of manipulation or force, but of natural recognition. David has proven himself trustworthy over time. He did not chase after the throne found him. This moment marks something important. Power that comes after waiting is different from power taken by force. It carries less anxiety, less need to prove something, less fear of loss. Upon assuming the kingship over all of Israel, David makes strategic and symbolic choices. He conquers Jerusalem and establishes it as the capital. The city does not belong to any specific tribe, becoming a center of unity. This decision reveals his political and spiritual sensitivity. He governs not only with military force, but with vision. Jerusalem becomes not only an administrative center, but a point of convergence for the identity of the people. David's reign strengthens, military victories occur, borders expand, and the kingdom prospers. But what is most striking is not the external growth, but the internal stability. David governs with the awareness that everything he has was built over years of pain, waiting, and dependence on God. Power does not intoxicate him because he remembers where he came from. The throne does not erase the countryside, nor the caves, nor the exile. These memories act as anchors, preventing him from disconnecting from his own humanity. Even in this moment of apparent fulfillment, something remains unfinished within David. Power has arrived, but it has not brought complete rest. He begins to feel a deep desire to honor God's presence in a more concrete way. The ark, a symbol of this presence, does not yet occupy the center of national life. David understands that governing without centering God is repeating past mistakes. He prepares to move something that goes beyond politics and territory. For him, the kingdom only makes sense if it is aligned with that which sustained him during the waiting. This chapter in David's life doesn't explode in noisy celebration, but is grounded in sobriety. The power that arrives after so long doesn't shout, doesn't impose itself, doesn't need to be displayed. It rests. David becomes king not only because he received a title, but because he became someone capable of bearing the weight of that title without losing his heart. Perhaps you are living through a time when what seemed distant is beginning to draw closer. Recognition, stability, the long-awaited rest. David's story suggests that the greatest challenge is not arriving, but remaining whole after arriving. And if this journey continues to resonate within you, persevere. There are still profound aspects of this reign that need to be traversed, because not every challenge ends when power arrives. Some begin precisely there. After consolidating the kingdom and establishing Jerusalem as the capital, something begins to stir within David that doesn't stem from politics or conquest, but from memory. He remembers those who sustained him when there was no throne, army, or security. External stability awakens in him an ancient desire to bring to the center of national life that which has always been at the center of his inner life. The Ark of the Covenant, symbol of God's presence, cannot remain on the sidelines. For David, governing without this centrality would be repeating mistakes he knew all too well. The movement to bring the ark is charged with expectation and emotion. It is not merely a religious act, but a profoundly personal gesture. David does not see the ark as a distant sacred object, but as an expression of the presence that accompanied him in the fields, in the caves, in flight, and in waiting. He desires that this presence now be at the heart of the kingdom. However, the first attempt ends in tragedy. A mistake in transporting the ark results in the death of Uzzah, and the celebratory atmosphere turns to fear. The impact is immediate. David stops everything. The shock is not only because of what happened, but also because of the realization that good intentions do not replace reverence. This moment marks a significant turning point in David's journey. He feels fear, confusion, and even frustration. The presence he so desires to honor now seems distant, almost dangerous. For a time, the ark remains outside Jerusalem, in the house of Obed-Edom. There, something curious happens. The house is blessed. The presence of God, when received with reverence, generates life. This news reaches David and rekindles something within him. The problem wasn't the presence itself, but the way it was received. His heart needed to remain surrendered, even at the height of his power. On the second attempt, everything changes. There is no rush, no improvisation. The ark is carried according to the ancient guidelines, with care, honor, and awareness. David sheds any royal image and dances before the Lord with intensity, without calculation, without self-protection. For some, this gesture seems exaggerated, even shameful. For David, it is liberation. He does not dance for the people, nor for the leaders, nor to consolidate his image. He dances because he recognizes that everything he has become was born from God's faithfulness, not from his own merit. This moment reveals something essential about David's heart. Power did not distance him from humility. He did not become a prisoner of his own position. On the contrary, the higher he climbs, the more he bows. This dance is not impulsive, it is deeply conscious. It is the expression of someone who knows that the throne does not define him, and that the presence of God remains the only place where his identity remains secure. Not everyone understands this gesture. Michal, Saul's daughter, observes from a distance and despises David in her heart. To her, the king's behavior seems unworthy, inappropriate, almost offensive to the image of royalty. The confrontation that follows is silent, but revealing. David makes it clear that he prefers to be small before God than great in the eyes of men. He does not compromise his devotion to maintain appearances. The difference between David and Saul becomes evident here. One ruled from image, the other from presence. With the ark established in Jerusalem, David feels a new desire arise. He looks at his palace and notices the contrast with the tent where the ark rests. Then comes the desire to build a permanent house for God. The desire is sincere, born of gratitude, but the divine response is unexpected. God does not reject David, but redefines his limits. He will not be the builder of the temple. This refusal could be interpreted as frustration, but David reacts differently. He accepts. More than that, he hears an even greater promise. God promises to establish the house of David, a lasting lineage, a kingdom that would span generations. The promise goes beyond the present, pointing to something David will not fully see. Upon hearing this, David does not exalt himself. He sits before God. The king becomes once again that young man from the field, aware of his own insignificance. His prayer is simple, profound, without demands. He recognizes that all he has received surpasses any human expectation. This moment seals something important. David understands that not all pious desires are fulfilled in the way we imagine, and that accepting limitations is also part of spiritual maturity. He doesn't build the temple, but prepares everything so that his son can do it. He invests in something whose fruit he will not harvest himself. This kind of attitude reveals a heart that doesn't live only for the present, but for something greater than itself. The reign continues, victories persist, stability is established. But this period also carries a silent danger: comfort. Life is now predictable, organized, safe. David no longer needs to fight every day to survive. It is precisely in this space of tranquility that inner vigilance becomes even more necessary. Danger does not always present itself as an external threat. Sometimes it hides in the feeling that everything is under control. Perhaps you know this place too. A time when life finally seems settled, the battles lessen, and the heart risks relaxing too much. David's journey suggests that true worship is born not only in pain, but also in stability. Remaining surrendered when everything is going well can be as challenging as trusting when everything seems to be falling apart. If this journey still resonates with you, stay alert. David's story is not yet finished, and the passage that follows reveals how even the most sincere hearts need constant vigilance so as not to get lost precisely when they seem safest. There is an almost imperceptible change when life settles into a predictable rhythm. Urgencies diminish, threats recede, and what once required constant vigilance begins to seem controlled. For David, this moment arrives when the kingdom is firm, the battles have been won, and the power structure no longer depends on daily survival decisions. It is precisely then that something shifts within. Not abruptly, not as conscious rebellion, but as inner relaxation. The heart, tired of fighting for so long, begins to lower its guard. David remains in Jerusalem while his men go to war. This seemingly small choice carries enormous symbolic weight. He is not where he used to be. The place once occupied by responsibility is now filled with comfort. Idle time creates space for scattered thoughts, and the absence of external pressure paves the way for silent internal conflicts. There is no plan, no intention to fall. There is only a sequence of unguarded moments. It is on one of these nights that David sees Bathsheba. The initial glance could have been just that, a glance, but it lingers. The difference between temptation and downfall often lies in the duration of the glance, not in its existence. David, who so often resisted justifiable opportunities to seize power, now yields to something that requires no courage, only carelessness. The contrast is stark. The man who faced giants now stumbles in silence, without witnesses, without direct confrontation. The fall doesn't happen in isolation. It pulls other decisions after it. To cover up his mistake, David summons Uriah, tries to manipulate circumstances, and creates strategies to preserve his image. When that fails, he makes an even more serious decision. He orders the death of a righteous man to protect his reputation. The weight of this moment lies not only in the sin, but in the internal rupture. The heart that once preferred suffering to losing integrity now crosses a line it never imagined crossing. For a time, everything seems to work. Life goes on, the throne remains, the kingdom doesn't crumble. This is one of the most dangerous aspects of unconfronted error, the feeling that nothing has happened. But the silence that was once a space for formation now becomes a space of estrangement. David continues to rule, but something within him falls silent. The music fades, spiritual sensitivity dulls. The leadership remains standing, but the heart is heavy. When the prophet Nathan arrives, he doesn't accuse directly. He tells a story, a simple, almost everyday parable. David reacts with indignation, demanding justice. It is then that Nathan says, "That man is you." The impact is not only moral, it is existential. Everything David tried to hide is brought to light clearly and undeniably. There is no way to negotiate, justify, or escape. The mirror is held up to him. David's response reveals who he still is, despite his fall. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't blame circumstances. He doesn't shift responsibility. He acknowledges, "I have sinned against the Lord." This short phrase carries a profound return. It doesn't erase the consequences, but it restores direction. Repentance doesn't spare him the pain to come, but it reconnects him with God. The difference between Saul and David is clearly manifested here. Both erred, but only one allowed himself to be truly broken. The consequences arrive. The loss of his son, the public weight of his mistake, the family rupture that will unfold in the following years. David feels it all. He cries, fasts, prays. When the loss is confirmed, he gets up, washes himself, and worships. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because he recognizes that God remains God, even when the pain persists. This gesture is not coldness, it is painful maturity. He learns that true repentance is not about manipulating God to reverse consequences, but about remaining faithful even when they arrive. This chapter in David's life is weighty because it dismantles any idealization. He doesn't fall for lack of faith, but for lack of vigilance, not through explicit rebellion, but through prolonged carelessness. Even so, his story doesn't end with the fall. The ground is not the end. For David, it becomes the place where the heart is realigned. There is something profoundly human in this passage. People who have walked far with God, who have won difficult battles, who have endured long injustices, can also fall when they relax too much. The danger lies not only in bad days, but in good days as well. Restoration begins when the truth is accepted without reservation and the heart is willing to return, even knowing that the way back passes through pain. If this part of the journey has left you silent, allow that silence to linger for a moment. Some stories don't demand immediate answers, only attention. And if you feel that this path still needs to be traveled, stay. There is still restoration, maturity, and legacy ahead, because David's story doesn't end with his mistake, but with what he becomes after it. After the fall, life doesn't return to its previous state. The throne remains standing, the kingdom continues to function, but something essential has shifted within David. He is no longer the same man who rose to power with a light heart. Now, each day carries a deeper awareness of the weight of his choices, and leadership ceases to be merely an honor, becoming a responsibility felt in body and soul. The repentance was real, but it didn't erase the scars. It only made room for the pain to begin to fulfill a silent role, that of forging maturity. The consequences of error don't arrive all at once. They spread slowly, like cracks that appear over time in a seemingly firm structure. David's household begins to experience internal conflicts, family tensions, and decisions that spiral out of control. The hidden sin generates disorder that manifests itself on other levels, not as arbitrary punishment, but as the natural unfolding of an inner breakdown. David observes all this without the comfort of easy explanations. He feels the weight of knowing that part of the chaos stemmed from his own choices. Pain is no longer merely circumstantial, it is pedagogical. Each loss, each conflict, each tear carries a lesson that could not be learned in any other way. David begins to govern with more caution, more silence, less impulsiveness. He listens more, speaks less. The experience of error makes him more sensitive to the suffering of others. The powerful king finally learns what it means to lead from a recognized fragility. The Psalms from this period carry a different tone. They are not merely songs of confidence or celebration, but prayers permeated by awareness, repentance, and humble hope. David no longer speaks to God from a position of strength, but from one of dependence. He knows that he does not govern because he is impeccable, but because he has been sustained by mercy. This inner change does not diminish him. On the contrary, it makes him more human, more accessible, more genuine. The relationship with his children becomes a constant source of pain. Violence, rebellion, and loss enter his home like distant echoes of past decisions. David suffers not only as a king, but as a father. There are times when he falls silent because he cannot find enough words to express the weight of what he feels. The man who faced armies now finds himself powerless in the face of family suffering. This powerlessness confronts him with a limit that no power can overcome. Even so, something profound remains alive within him. David does not turn away from God. He does not harden his heart, does not succumb to cynicism, does not use pain as a justification to shut himself off. He learns to walk with it. He learns that there are sufferings that are not removed, but integrated. That maturity is not born from the absence of flaws, but from the willingness to continue walking with a broken heart. The rain continues, but now with a different tone. There is not the same euphoria of the early years, nor the lightness of youth. There is sobriety, there is awareness, there is depth. David governs knowing that everything is temporary, including himself. This awareness brings him even closer to God because it frees him from the illusion of control. He understands that the throne is a place of passage, not of permanence. A man after God's own heart is not one who never makes mistakes, but one who allows mistakes to transform him. David becomes someone who understands grace not as a concept, but as a lived experience. Mercy ceases to be theory and becomes fundamental. This changes how he sees the people, his enemies, the weak, and even himself. Perhaps there is something familiar in this process. The feeling that life goes on, but with a new weight, that the mistake has been forgiven, but not forgotten, that the heart has matured by force. David's journey shows that this kind of pain is not the end of the road, but a different kind of beginning, a quieter, more humble, more conscious beginning. If this part of the journey continues to resonate within you, don't rush this silence. Some transformations happen without words, only with time, presence, and truth. There is still one last stretch of this story, where everything that has been lived, victories, falls, waiting, and pain, begins to organize itself into something greater than David ever imagined. As the years go by, the pace of David's life slows down. Not because the challenges have disappeared, but because his body no longer responds as it once did, and his soul carries the accumulated weight of everything he has lived through. The warrior who ran through caves, faced armies and conquered cities, now moves with more caution, more silence, more reflection. Time adjusts priorities, and what once seemed urgent loses strength in the face of what truly remains. David begins to look back with a clarity that only maturity allows. He remembers the field, the lonely nights, the fear, the distant promise, the long wait, the improbable victories, and the deep falls. Nothing is romanticized. Everything is integrated. Each phase finds its place in his memory, not as a justification, but as part of a larger story that he never fully controlled. This awareness does not sadden him, it brings him peace. The focus now shifts. It's no longer about conquering, proving, or resisting. It's about preparing. David understands that the future of the people cannot depend solely on the strength of one man, and that the kingdom is not personal property, but something that needs to be handed over in good condition. He begins to invest time, energy, and resources in something he will not see completed. The temple he so desired to build will not be the work of his own hands, but he prepares every detail so that it can happen later. There is something profoundly transformative in working towards a result that will not bring personal recognition. This attitude reveals how much David's heart was shaped throughout his life. The young man who was once forgotten in the field now chooses not to be the center of attention. He doesn't compete for prominence with the future. On the contrary, he prepares for it. Spiritual maturity manifests itself precisely there, when the need to be remembered gives way to the desire for something greater to continue, even without our presence. David also becomes more intentional in his words. He guides, advises, and warns. His instructions carry the weight of someone who has experienced both faithfulness and human frailty. There is no arrogance, only sobriety. He knows that power, when not guarded, corrodes. He knows that the heart needs to be guarded with more zeal than the throne. Therefore, he insists on something simple and profound: to remain faithful, to walk with God, not to stray from the center. As the body weakens, consciousness deepens. David understands that his greatest contribution was not only unifying the kingdom, winning wars, or establishing Jerusalem as the capital, but leaving a testament to a real relationship with God, imperfect, flawed, but sincere. He will not be remembered as someone without errors, but as someone who never stopped returning. This constant return, even after falls, becomes the strongest mark of his legacy. Time also forces him to confront his own limitations. He no longer controls everything, no longer decides everything. Others take on tasks, responsibilities, and decisions. For someone who has lived so long on high alert, this transition demands humility. David doesn't cling to power as if it defined his identity. He understands that his role is changing, and he accepts this without rebellion. There is peace in recognizing the end of a season. During this period, David's spirituality becomes even simpler. Fewer requests, more recognition. Less urgency, more gratitude. He praises not only what God does, but who God is. This matured faith does not depend on quick answers or spectacular interventions. It rests. And this rest does not come from the absence of problems, but from the certainty that history has always been in the right hands. David's life begins to move towards closure, not as an abrupt end, but as the natural conclusion of a long and intense cycle. Everything that has been lived now organizes itself into something coherent. The boy from the field, the fugitive, the king, the broken man, all coexist in the same person. There is no denial of the past, nor fear of the future. There is integration. Perhaps there is something profoundly human in this moment, the feeling that there is no longer a need to run so much, prove so much, fight so much, that some battles are behind us and others no longer need to be fought. David's story suggests that reaching this point is not a sign of weakness, but of maturity. It is when the heart learns to trust without urgency. If this journey continues to resonate within you, perhaps it's because something within you is also silently maturing. Remain attentive to this process. Sometimes what seems like a slowdown is simply life organizing itself so that what is essential remains when everything else passes. There comes a point when history ceases to advance in grand movements and begins to conclude in simple gestures. There are no more decisive battles, nor decisions that alter the course of a nation. There is only time fulfilling its role, leading life to a point of rest. With David, this time arrives silently. The man who lived each season intensely now approaches the end without fanfare, without drama, without needing to prove anything to anyone. His body weakens, but his consciousness remains awake. He knows the journey has been long, marked by promises, delays, mistakes, and restoration. Nothing was superficial. Each step left its mark. The young man who once tended sheep, the fugitive who slept in caves, the king who ruled a nation, and the man who wept over his own falls now coexist in a single, integrated memory. There is no fragmentation. There is wholeness. David observes the kingdom functioning without depending on his direct power anymore. This brings him a strange, almost unexpected peace. Life goes on. People assume roles. The future no longer needs him to exist. This realization doesn't create emptiness, but rest. He finally understands that his identity was never on the throne. The throne was merely a place of passage. What remained was the heart molded along the journey. The final words David conveys carry both simplicity and weight. They are not military strategies or grandiose plans. They are guidelines on faithfulness, inner vigilance, and commitment to God. He knows that the greatest danger for those who govern comes not from the outside, but from within. Power, when not accompanied by an aligned heart, becomes destructive. Therefore, he insists on what he learned the hard way. Guarding one's heart is more important than expanding borders. David also bids farewell to life with the awareness that he was not perfect. He does not try to rewrite his story or soften his flaws. What he carries now is something deeper than pride or guilt. Gratitude. Gratitude for having been sustained even when he erred, corrected without being discarded, restored without being idealized. He understands that his greatest inheritance is not achievements, but the testimony that it is possible to walk with God in a real way, even while being human. When David finally rests, there is no feeling of incompleteness. There is closure. The story that began in anonymity ends in legacy, not because everything turned out right, but because everything was traversed with a heart that never stopped returning. This constant return is the invisible thread that connects his entire life. Not perfection, not strength, not power, but the willingness to return. David's impact transcends his time. His name becomes a point of reference. His psalms continue to echo profound human emotions: fear, hope, guilt, joy. trust. His lineage points to something greater than himself. Centuries later, his story is still told not as an unattainable example, but as an honest mirror of the human condition before God. Everything David experienced points to a silent truth. Greatness lies not in never falling, but in never losing sight of one's heart. His life was not a straight line, but a path full of curves, detours, and returns. And yet it was considered beautiful in the eyes of God. Perhaps that's what makes this story so enduring. It doesn't push away the listener, it welcomes them. It doesn't demand perfection, it invites sincerity. At some point along the way, almost everyone recognizes themselves in David, whether in waiting, falling, pain, or returning. If this journey has stayed with you this far, perhaps it's because something within you also seeks this kind of faith. Real, profound, without masks. A faith that learns with time, that allows itself to be corrected, that doesn't shy away from silence or truth. And if you wish to continue walking through stories like this, told with calm, depth, and reverence, stay with us. The Bible teaches exists for this, to traverse the scriptures as one traverses one's own life, without haste, without noise, with an attentive heart. David's life ends, but it doesn't fade away. It continues to resonate because it wasn't built to impress, but to transcend time. What remains are not isolated grand deeds, but the invisible thread that connected each phase, a heart that never stopped turning to God, even when it lost itself. The scriptures did not preserve this story to exalt a man, but to reveal a path where faith and failure coexist, where hope and fulfillment do not cancel each other out, where falling is not the end and returning is not shame. David endures because his story does not create distance, it creates identification. It does not point to someone unreachable, but to someone profoundly human, sustained by a grace greater than himself. Perhaps, along this journey, you have found yourself in some specific stretch, in the long wait, in the silent injustice, in the temptation of shortcuts, in the mistake that exacts a price, in the painful regret, in the maturity that comes with time. This is no coincidence. Stories that transcend generations do so because they touch on something that does not change, the condition of the human heart before God. The field, the cave, the palace, the fall, and the final silence are not merely ancient settings. They continue to exist in other forms, in other lives, in other times. The Bible is not just a record of what was, it is a mirror of what is. And that is why stories like this do not demand haste, they demand listening. If you've made it this far, perhaps it wasn't just out of curiosity, but out of recognition. Something on this journey has found a place within you. If so, allow it to remain. Come back when you need to. Walk slowly. There are many other stories waiting to be traversed with the same care, depth, and reverence. The Bible teaches exists for this purpose, not to over-explain, not to jump to conclusions, but to walk through the scriptures as one walks through life itself, attentive, honest, and willing to return whenever necessary.